Welcome to our segment called Washington Current Review. This will be hosted by the famous, or properly said, this man fits into the class of rich and famous. He is none other than Mr. Frank Islam, who is the chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group. This investment group is located in Tysons Corner, Virginia. This afternoon, Mr. Islam has a very interesting guest alongside him. Who is it? Let's find out.
This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics and explore topics of current interest that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Claudio Lilienfeld, Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for South Asia, and we will discuss issues involving U.S.-India trade. Welcome, Claudio. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very good. Thank you very much for coming again. The intellectual property aspect is a key issue in India. My question to you, Claudio, is one of the key obstacles for improved trade relations between India and the U.S. is the perceived weakness in Indian intellectual property protection. Claudio, what does India need to do to respond to this?
Well, intellectual property rights is high on our policy agenda in what we deal with and dealing with the Indian government. India has made a number of strides, strengthened its patent law, for example, as late as 2005, but we continue to have a number of concerns. We see India as a place where innovation and creativity are becoming the center of the economic growth there.
Wonderful.
And American companies certainly who are interested in doing business and investing in India see the protection of their creativity, whether it's in the pharmaceutical arena or in the media and copyright arena, as being important in being able to have an incentive to do business in India. India has a way to go on that front. And what we see is that it's in their interests, in India's own interests, notwithstanding the fact that they have companies like pharmaceuticals who want the freedom that they currently have in the generic industry to operate within a slightly less confined environment. There are more and more industries, including the pharmaceutical industry in India, who are that are involved in the creative side, developing their own drugs, and we're hoping that India will continue to strengthen its intellectual property rights protections.
Very good. Thank you. There are a lot of obstacles and challenges in India with regard to the legal system. It is slow and arcane. Is there a need for systematic reform of the legal system in order to facilitate better U.S.-India trade?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is probably that we don't normally comment on systematic reforms required in India. We do share a constitutional system, and the rule of law is important in both the U.S. and India. So we're starting at the right place. India does have enormous backlogs in its court system, and in fact is completely closed to outside legal firms establishing themselves in India. And these are impediments for India because it limits the competitiveness, limits the expertise available in India, limits opportunities for Indians as well, given the diversity of requirements in India's economy. U.S., for example, is wide open for law firms to practice here. We'd like to see the same thing in India. We'd like to see the backlogs ended, and some of that is resourcing, and India, of course, is on the upward track in terms of being able to resource that. Goes back to the intellectual property rights as well. Enforcement mechanisms there are insufficient at this time. Some of that is resource, some of it is will, and we hope that as the resources come up and the requirements increase, that folks will pay mind to those problems.
As you probably know, there's a lot of U.S. regulations, and you have to do a lot of paperwork to comply with the U.S. regulations. India has often complained that the United States regulation create unnecessary hurdles for trade between U.S. and India. What should the U.S. do in response?
Well, the first thing is that we hear this as well, and my first instinct is to respond on the ironic part, and simply just to say that the U.S. economy is wide open. The restrictions and barriers are relatively minimal. Those that exist are primarily in the areas of protecting our consumers in terms of food safety and product safety. We actually have an active amount of cooperation with the Indian government and private sector to try to help them strengthen their ability to export where there may be concerns about this sort of thing. And in fact, some of the relatively major achievements that we've had in the last couple of years have been in that area. For example, the very fact that Indian mangoes are coming to the United States now.
And I love those mangoes.
They are fabulous.
They're really good.
Absolutely.
Nice and juicy.
They are among the best, if not the best in the world. And we hopefully will see more of them in the coming years. But it took quite a bit of effort. It included our experts going over to India, helping to establish the right processing for those mangoes. And we're hopefully going to be able to do that to expand mango imports, to do it in other areas as well. We face a number of barriers going into India, far more. We try to focus on a science-based regulatory system here. We still face in India some obstructions to imports, whether it's in the areas of wheat or dairy or poultry, which are all completely prohibited from being exported to India. And so I would just simply say, we recognize India's concerns. We need to work with them because I think we both, India and the US, agree on the importance of protecting both our workers and our consumers. And we'd rather strengthen their ability to compete in that market rather than weaken any of our own protections.
As I understand that the FDA just has opened an office in India not too long ago.
That is exactly right. In fact, FDA-related cooperation is a big deal. Just started
I'm really
in the last
pleased
year.
to see that. It's a good first step.
Absolutely. And we're doing that across the board. Where you can name an economic sector where there could be cooperation, more or less it's happening. Agriculture, health, FDA, energy.
Well, thank you, Claudio.
You're welcome.
India is an emerging market. India would like to become a global economic power. India touts itself as an attractive destination for investment, yet has a significant investment restriction in a number of key sectors. How does that figure in your policy priorities when dealing with India?
Well, this is another irony with respect to India. India has been a destination for significant investments, including from the US over the past decade. And many of its successes are connected to this growth in its own economy and the investments coming in, but it is also highly restricted in a number of areas. We believe very strongly that it's not only in the interests of the foreign investors, but that India's expanding economy will benefit more people, and the term inclusive growth, which is very important in India, we recognize this as a critical factor. And for example, one of the areas, or actually a range of areas that are affected simply by the one area of retail trade. And retail is beginning now in India. And some American companies are starting to make some partnerships, Walmart with Bharti Enterprises, for example. But the retail area is one in which the tentacles that reach out from that, whether it's in the logistics, the cold chain, the helping farmers develop better products and getting them to market, all of these things will be critical to India's overall expansion. So what we see this as rather than a zero-sum game where American investors or foreign investors get to extract from the Indian economy, we're looking at this as a win-win situation where everybody gains. India ends up having access to foreign markets as well.
Well, thank you. I went to India not too long ago. As far as the India's infrastructure is concerned, there's a lot to be done in India. Everyone agrees that India's infrastructure needs substantial improvement. How are U.S. companies participating in this process, given the obstacle that the U.S. companies have faced in the past?
Well, the obstacles have been there, and they've been daunting. I think one of the things that I'm going to focus immediately on, just to say this, is that we're looking at launching negotiations on a bilateral investment treaty, which addresses investment protections, particularly in these major infrastructure projects. And we're hoping that by making progress there, that will help incentivize companies getting involved in the infrastructure sector. There are a lot of areas, including that tie into these other foreign direct investment constraints, whether it's contributing to logistics and the energy sector. Companies are taking an active look. American companies are actually benefiting from the exports that support some of the infrastructure work that's going on right now. So whether or not they're actually investors in the prime, they're the primes in some of these projects, whether they're supplying to those projects, we see benefits occurring. Exports grew enormously, 75% last year from the U.S. to India, and much of this is in the heavy equipment and technology and expertise that can support the infrastructure development.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really glad that the way that the United States is working with India, that's just a wonderful. Thank you very much for coming to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is our show. Until next time, this is Frank Eslam of FY Investment Group wishing you a great week. Thank you very much for being here with us today.